Served on the State Historical Society Board of Trustees for 5 consecutive terms, and I love that. And I've taught, my degrees are in history and political science, primarily U.S. history and Iowa history, and a variety of political science courses over the years. And then in addition to serving on the State Historical Society Board, I've been a member and the program chair for an organization called the Des Moines Civil War Roundtable. And I line up all the speakers, and like I said, I've been doing it for 26 years. So my life has been knee-deep in history, and I love it. And some of my friends, I do other programs in addition to this one on ethnic heritage. I do one entitled How Iowa Met Baseball. And I did one just in Dubuque 2 weeks ago on baseball. And I'll be in Burlington Friday morning at 10 o'clock speaking to a group about baseball history. I do one entitled Iowa's Role in the Civil War. And I've done quite a few of those. And then I do what I'm going to do here today. And it runs about an hour long, but we're going to keep it informal, small group and so on. And I'll try and touch some of the key bases as we do this. And again, if anybody needs to leave early, I'm never offended. So crowds are always older, and my program can go on a little bit, and so on. So that's a little bit about me, and you'll find out more towards the end of my presentation. But one of the things I've done, a friend of mine worked at the state capitol for years, and he had me do an orientation on Iowa for the pages. And I remember the pages down there are the best of the high school kids. They're nominated by their principals and teachers and so on. And I prepared this years ago. And I want to have fun with the 5 or 6 of you here. I prepared an Iowa citizenship quiz. There's a lot of talk about bringing more civics back into the classroom, and I agree with that, but not in any restrictive way, okay? So sometimes I do this, and you're on the honor system, and I'm going to read 10 questions to you, okay? And just see how you do. Now, first of all, a show of hands. How many have lived in Iowa most of your lives? Good. I can even embarrass you more.
You can ask how many of us had Iowa history in elementary school?
That's one of the problems. Elementary school. We should require, we're one of 2 states left in the nation that do not require state history at the high school level. All right? There are schools that do, but it's extra effort on the behalf of teachers that love it. And I know a lot of the schools that do, but there aren't that many. And so anyway, but here's your quiz, and just keep track yourself. Iowa's official state tree is blank. Don't blurt it out. We'll come back and get the answers in a minute, okay? Second question. Name Iowa's 3rd largest city. 3rd largest city. Think about these because we'll come back to all of them. Iowa State College's first African-American graduate was, all right? Number 4, who were the Icarians? Tough question. Deals with ethnic background. Who were the Icarians? 5, who was Chief Blackhawk? Half point on that. What was his significance to Iowa history? The other half point. All right? 6, the only U.S. president born in Iowa was born in where? Stop. Okay? Iowa's oldest city is blank. All right? The center of German culture in Iowa is blank. The 2 cities, what 2 cities, are renowned for their Nordic Fest celebrations? Emmett County is named after who? And then here's the tough one. When I taught my Iowa history class, and this was for real, I offered an A to any student that would get this correct the first day of class. 16-week course. In all the years I taught, only 2 students raised their hands, and they were both eliminated. All right, I'll give you the reasons. Who was Iowa's first governor? So I could really have fun with you. Who was the father of our country and the first president? Well, why don't you know anything about your own state? All right? Let's come back to these and you can show hands. And anyone just don't blurt it out. Raise a hand. Official state tree.
Oak.
Okay, the oak. Here's a point. Keep track yourself, be honest. The 3rd largest city. The 3rd largest city.
Cedar Rapids.
No.
Sioux City.
No.
Iowa City.
No.
Burlington.
No. We're running out of cities.
Dubuque.
Davenport.
Davenport.
Cedar Rapids is second. Okay? We're on the right track, okay? Iowa State College's first African American graduate was, I don't know if any of you went to Iowa State or spent time in Ames. There's a building named after him on Iowa State's campus. Big clue, also on Simpson College's campus, because he went there as well.
Jack tries.
No,
No,
that's
it's
the football
the
stadium.
guy with the peanuts.
You got it.
I
The
can't say
peanut
his
guy.
name.
Who's the peanut guy?
Um,
What's his name? When you go to Iowa State, you can enter Carver Hall. George Washington Carver. All right? All kinds of patents on peanut products. Okay? Keep track of your own score. This is a hard one.
do
Is
I get it for knowing he's the peanut guy?
Give yourself a fourth of a point. This one's tough. Do you know from mythology who Icarus was? Who was he from mythology?
Flew too close to the sun.
He was a dreamer who basically offended the gods by building wings and thinking he could uncover the secret of flight. And in his arrogance, flew too close to the sun, the max welded, and the gods killed him on the rocks. He's a dreamer. Who were the Icarians in Iowa? There's a Lake Icaria in southwest Iowa near Corning. Anyone know who they were? Iowa has a history of utopian communities that came here. The Icarians were one of those. They were French communists led by Etienne Cabet, who came here around 1850, all right, and settled, and for about 40 years established a communal society. Everyone's heard of the Amanas, no one's heard of the Icarians. Well, one of the reasons is the Amanas are still here. The Icarians are long since gone, or through intermarriage and everything else, okay? The next question, who was Chief Blackhawk? Just briefly identify him, who was he? I mean, other than a Native American chief, which we know. Anyone know the tribe? What are the two dominant tribes in Iowa history?
Sac and Fox.
Sauk and Fox, or the Sauk? S-A-U-K or S-A-C? Same thing. Very good, you get half point. All right. Why was he significant? The other half point.
Did,
Any idea? He was a little bit different than some of the other Native Americans for a big reason.
didn't he sign a treaty?
Well, you're on the right track, but you got it wrong.
Well,
He didn't sign a
he
treaty.
didn't, okay.
1832 or the Black Hawk Wars. He was one of the last to resist against the broken treaties and the encroachment by Europeans. Keokuk gave in, all right? And there was some land ceded to Keokuk because he gave in, and then the white Europeans took it back, okay? But he plays a critical role in Iowa history.
Who was it that established the agreement for the reservation?
Well, there were a lot of different agreements on reservations.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I mean, the one down by Tama, where they, I mean, it's different.
Well, the Meskwaki,
Okay.
but they have a separate history too.
Okay,
Because, you know, they were basically chased out and forced to go to Kansas. And then they basically raised enough money to come back to the governor, selling, you know, a bunch of things. And they were given the chance to buy 80 acres near present-day Tama, Toledo. And they've been there ever since. It's not a reservation, all right? They're the rare exception. They're the rare exception.
yeah.
But anyway, but keep track of your score. We got a few more here. The only U.S. vice president born in Iowa was born where?
Vice president?
Hmm?
Oh.
The only U.S. vice president.
Vice president.
Vice president. You guys all know Hoover. That's too easy. Who was the only vice president?
Under Roosevelt.
That's right. Again, she gets a quarter point. Those quarter points are adding up.
Wallace, Henry Wallace.
Outstanding.
Oh, Wallace, okay,
And
Henry
he was-
Wallace.
Henry Wallace, born near Orient.
Okay.
One of the Wallace houses is down there still, and they have some communal gardens down there, and they provide wonderful fruit and vegetables. There were 4 Wallace houses in Des Moines, and then, of course, the birthplace was over there by Greenfield, not far from Greenfield, where the tornado did all the damage last year. All right, Iowa's oldest city, the first incorporated city.
Dubuque.
Very good. 1833, Dubuque. All right. The center of German culture, and again, I use this. Germans are everywhere. We all know that, and probably a lot of you have that background. Where is and was the center of German culture? With Turner societies, with gymnastics, with drinking clubs, with song fests. Where is the German Heritage Museum in Iowa today?
Is it the Advance?
Where?
The
No, not the
Advance.
Emanuels. In Davenport. In Davenport,
Never been.
okay?
I've never been with it.
It's a beautiful museum. When our board met, when it was first opened years ago, we met there. And, and I've done programs up on the top floor in Davenport, including this program. And let me finish up on this little quiz. There's a serious point to the quiz, and I think you guys get it too, all right? What two cities are renowned for their Nordic Fest celebration? Get a point for each one.
Story City. Story City is one.
Story City is one.
Dubuque?
Decorah.
Decorah,
Ah.
okay? Decorah, yeah. Decorah is one of my all-time favorite little cities in Iowa. Spent a lot of time up there. My wife and I owned a country schoolhouse for 31 years up in Alameda County. Hanover Township Schoolhouse number 2, built in 1871, on a trout stream, and we fixed it up for a weekend getaway. And we still spent quite a bit of time up there. And my wife went to school up in Postville, which is not far from Decorah. And so we have a fondness for Northeast Iowa.
Well, and-
Emmett County, this is maybe the hardest question, this and the Icarian question, is named after who? Anyone have any idea? What ethnic group is pretty dominant in Emmett County? The Irish. Robert Emmett was an Irish freedom fighter. And in the courthouse lawn, they have a statue of him there. A lot of our counties are named after prominent either Americans or people attached to Iowa. Think about this, Kossuth County is named after a Hungarian freedom fighter. A Hungarian freedom fighter. A lot are named after George Washington, Jefferson, okay? Some Mahaska after Native Americans and so on, all right? And then, the bonus question. Does anyone get an A in my class today? Who's the first governor of Iowa? Raise a hand if you think you know. Not the first territorial governor. Some people remember that name. There were 3 territorial governors before the first governor. Let me tell you about my 2 students that got kicked out of class. They didn't get kicked out. One raised her hand the first day of class when I said, can you name the first governor? And I looked at my class list. She had the same last name. She was excused. All right. The other one was a young guy that knew, because his buddy had taken my class, that I was going to offer an A if he could get that answer right. And I kicked him out of class, okay? I did this with the pages of the Iowa legislature, the best and the brightest of our high school students. Not one out of 50 kids in the room over lunch could name Ansel Briggs. Ansel Briggs.
I remember.
Robert Lucas is our first territorial governor. All right? I do this for a serious reason. We do a really lousy job of teaching Iowa history. We do. All right? And like I said, I've lived here most of my life. I'm not native to Iowa. But I taught it, and I've done these programs all over. Small towns, big towns, libraries. I did a program yesterday in a retirement center in Des Moines. It wasn't on ethnic heritage, it was my baseball program, okay? And I enjoy doing them, not to humiliate or embarrass anybody, but to make a serious point that we need a lot more. When you hear the expression, don't mess with Texas, they require a full year of Texas history. Wisconsin, you cannot teach in Wisconsin schools until you've had a year of Wisconsin history, all right? And then you wonder why our biggest export in Iowa is not corn and soybeans, it's young people. It's young, they don't feel any roots here. They don't feel any roots here. They don't need much reason to want to leave, all right? All right, now, one other thing, and maybe I can get Aaron to make some copies, but one other thing that I included in my
You want me to
presentation.
run it up to her?
Oh.
I'm right here.
Oh,
I
yeah,
can make
okay.
some copies.
3, 6, about 10 copies. But one other reason I do this as well is that obviously one of the hottest topics politically and every other which way over the last 15, 20 years is immigration. And I'm a huge baseball fan. I am a Yankee fan, but I'm also a big iCubs fan. I spend a lot of time down at the Iowa Cubs, and I'll be there tomorrow at noon watching a game against the Buffalo Bisons. And that's a nice thing, again, being, quote, refocused my time is flexible. I can go to baseball games in the middle of the day, and there's no one there at the ballpark. It's great. And on Thursdays, the first beer is free. So, so it's called the Mug Club. But one of the things that the Iowa Cubs have done for a number of years, and what I'm having Aaron run off, so you guys each have a copy. I'm not going to read it all to you, but I'm going to tell you about it, and you can look at it when you leave here, is that every 4th of July, District Court Judge Robert Pratt, he's semi-retired now, he welcomes new citizens to America by doing a naturalization ceremony, having all of them down on the ballpark, lined up on the first or third base line, and then he does a swearing-in oath. And then he does a speech. And I want to just, you can read the details, but I want to just read a few words from. But I know Bob, and I've known him for a long, long time. He and his wife Rosemary are good friends of my wife's and I. But here's a few of the things he said. He said it's especially meaningful to be here on, this was, he's talking about their former allegiance to other countries. What you solemnly renounced is allegiance to the government of another land. You did not renounce the devotion for the people of your native land. Preserve that always. I suggest that you master the English language. Learn it well, but also preserve your native language, its heritage, and its culture. We are a nation made strong by people like you who traveled long distances, overcame great obstacles, and made tremendous sacrifices to provide a better life for yourselves and your families. As George Washington said over 240 years ago, the bosom of America is open to receive not only the opulent and the respected stranger, but the oppressed and the persecuted of all nations and religions. I'm skipping around, so we'll be done here in a minute. He says, you may hear voices in this land say that there is only one true American religion. Do not believe it. As an American, you can freely practice as a Christian, a Jew, a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Muslim, or you can be an agnostic or an atheist. You may hear that there's only one true American way of thinking about political matters. Do not believe it, all right? That there is only one true American set of values. Do not believe it. Simply stated, there is no single American way to think or believe. Former Justice Ginsburg, and this is a quote from her, at the start, it is true that the nation very much needed perfection. The original Constitution permitted slavery, severely limited who counted among we the people. When the nation was new, only white property-owning men had the right to vote and participate. Native Americans and women came to be embraced as full citizens. And then there's a quote from Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America. The greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than other nations, but rather in her ability to repair her faults. And I won't go on reading because now you get a copy yourself and you can read this afterwards and think about it, all right? I've been down there for that, ceremony, and it's emotional, it's touching, and, and I think it's really meaningful to these people that are about to become American citizens. So, all right, for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to talk about who we are. And first of all, a question to, 10 of us that are in the room. I'm going to exclude myself and tell you a little bit about myself later. But in the room, is there anyone in this group right now, it's a small group, that doesn't have any Irish, English, okay, or German ancestry in their background? Irish, English, or German? Anyone? Okay, that's who we are. I can raise my hand. I don't.
What about Norwegian?
Well, no, we'll get to that.
Okay.
All right. But I'm just trying to give you a profile of who most Irelands are in terms of ethnicity. Most of them come from these groups predominantly. They're not the first, they are the most numerous. Almost every major ethnic group has a cultural center. Not all of them. We've just named 2 for the Norwegians. What's going on this weekend in Pella? All right, you guys know that. The Tulip Festival. The 2 best communities in the state of Iowa preserving their ethnic background are Decorah and Pella. There's no one even close in terms of that. The entire community throwing itself into celebrating who they are ethnically and preserving the old world way of doing things and having museums. Vesterheim means Western home in Decorah, and it's a wonderful ethnic museum. I just mentioned the German one in Davenport, okay? So, Demographers are people that study population and population movements. And I want to throw out just a couple of terms at you, and I want you to start thinking about it. Okay? Push-pull factors. What does that deal with? Think about your own family. Some of your families have done extensive family histories. And you can trace your ancestry back to the old country, maybe hundreds of years. A lot of families have not done that. One of the extra credit projects I offer my students in my Iowa history class is that if on either side of your family you haven't traced your ancestry back very far, you do that in this class over the next 16 weeks and you'll get extra credit. Because you're filling a huge hole in your understanding who your family is. Now, push-pull factors, what does that mean? What is it that pushed your family out of where they originally came from? Where did they go next? What was the pull? And if they moved 4 or 5 times, why did they leave and why did they come to another place? How did they eventually and why did they eventually end up in Iowa and where? Push-pull factors. All right? Think about it while we're talking here and about the ethnic groups. Now, 3 other terms that are pretty important for understanding this. Emigration, immigration, and migration. They're all different and they're all spelled differently. There's an easy way to remember that. What does immigration, I-M-M, mean? Coming in. Coming in. What does emigration, E-1-M, mean? Exiting. Exiting. Why are you leaving? Why are you coming in? And migration is, the Great Migration took place as Jim Crow laws were instituted in the Deep South after Reconstruction, and lynchings followed, and black and white separate worlds and one inferior. And the Great Migration, a lot of black families moved from the South to the cities of the North. So migration is moving within a country for different reasons. I think we all know that different parts of the country are different culturally, ethnically, in terms of prejudice and everything else. We're a mobile nation. We're a mobile nation to this day. Small towns, a lot of them have generations that go back, 4 or 5. But I've studied your town, Alden, all right? You guys peaked in population of about 900 around the year 2000. You're down to under 750. And how many young people are staying here after they go off to Ellsworth or they go off to Iowa State? How many come back? I did a leadership conference in Carroll County years ago where we have one of our campuses, DMAC does. And I had 9 of the best students from Carroll Kemper and from the public high school up on the stage, talking very openly. They were all seniors. Scholarships waiting at West Point, scholarships waiting at Notre Dame. And I asked the 9 in front of an auditorium filled with their parents and teachers, how many of you plan on staying in Carroll when you graduate? 1 hand went up. The rest couldn't wait to get out of there. And they had their reasons. All different, all right? The one kid was inheriting a dealership from his father and grandfather, and he was staying, all right? All the others were leaving. And then so, push-pull factors, immigration, immigration, migration. Some general terms. We're going to do this somewhat chronologically, and I'm going to bring up some specific names. If you go out, who were the first Iowans? The ancestors of Chief Blackhawk, all right? There are at least 17 uniquely indigenous Native American tribes that live here in what we call Iowa before any Europeans got here. And very different. And long before those 17 were here, we can trace back evidence of Native American habitation in what we know as Iowa back to 10,000, 15,000 years ago. Has anyone ever heard of Clovis projectile points? Know what this gentleman back here knows. What's a Clovis projectile point?
The shape is a little bit different. It's not the...
Of Native American spear points, all right? Uniquely made in New Mexico. But we have found them here in Iowa. And the answer is very simple, the Mississippi River. Native Americans moved all over this continent before any Vikings came, before any Spanish came or anybody else came. How many of you have been to the Effigy Mounds? It's a gorgeous place. Again, I give extra credit for a lot of things to my students. And I always in the fall, especially when the leaves are changing, said, if you've never been to the Effigy Mounds, I want you to spend 2 days up there listening to the National Park Service telling you about the history of the first islands. All right? Walk those trails, learn about those people, okay? So, yeah. Now, remember this about Iowa and the first islands. You can go back much earlier than that. What was the landmass between Russia and Alaska called? Anyone remember? And at one time, it wasn't all ice and water. It was a landmass where both animals and people could come across tens of thousands of years ago. And there's pretty good evidence they did. We're all related to some sheep herder in Middle Asia, all right? The Genome Project, okay? There's some guy that had a bunch of wives and we all descended from that. Or in the Olduvai Gorge in Africa, okay? Two of the earliest, evidences of any kind of civilization we've ever found. But getting back to the landmass, it's called Beringia, the Bering Sea. And we know they came down across Canada, where the present Alcan Highway is, and drifted across North America. But anyway, getting back to our purposes here, there's plenty of evidence. The National Park Service has a wonderful website, and I oftentimes encourage my students to go to it. Has anyone ever heard of Cahokia? Has anyone ever heard of Cahokia? Cahokia is across the river from St. Louis, Missouri. Cahokia was an Indian mound bigger than the pyramids of Egypt. Cahokia was a city. 40,000 lived in the central city, and 80,000 lived in what we would call today's suburbs. It was bigger than any city in Europe at the time. These are these primitive savages that supposedly lived here when the first English and Irish came. All right? I think most of us know about the Aztec capital, predating Europe, much larger city than anything in Europe at the time. All right? So there's all kinds of evidence of people living. The definition of civilization historians use, one part of it is characterized by urban life. These were not all wandering nomads, eking out, an existence barely. I mean, if you go down to Mesa Verde in Colorado, the cliff dwellers, or you can go down to Pueblo Bonito. This was a 4-story building with 10 kivas, which are religious ceremonies, under one roof. Under one roof. Kevin Costner did a film series years ago, about 7 years ago, late 1990s, called 500 Nations. It's the best thing I've ever seen on Native Americans, and I use it in my classes. 500 Nations. The coffee table book is about yay by yay, all right, about that thick. You get a workout just carrying the book. But it really is excellent for understanding what the early Americans are about. So they're here first. They're here first. When the Europeans first start coming here, who are the first Europeans that come in fairly significant numbers? They're the Spanish, the conquistadors. And the way I always told my students, now we know the Vikings are here 500 years before, but there was no sense of permanence when the Vikings came. Bjarni Herjolfsson and Erik the Red and Leif the Lucky were all in present-day Newfoundland. They established communities, but it was seasonal, and they never established a sense of permanence. They're here. They have found the form of writing the Vikings they're called runes, R-U-N-E-S. And they have found evidence of rune stones in Minnesota. In Minnesota. Does that conclusively prove Vikings were in St. Paul? No. All right? But they traveled, followed rivers and bodies of water, followed the Great Lakes. It could have been. It could have been. All right? But when the Spanish do start coming, in the late 1400s to early 1500s, their primary motivation for coming here was the 3 G's: gold, God, and glory. A lot of them were the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th son. This is a Catholic country, large families. Europeans, not just Spanish, but your ancestors in Germany and Ireland did the same thing. They practiced a practice called primogeniture. What does that big fancy word mean? Break it down.
Firstborn gets it all.
The eldest son, not just the firstborn. Girls don't count.
No.
All right? Eldest son gets the land. And Europe doesn't have large farms. You can't keep giving, land to your sons. So a lot of those young Spanish men, later English men, they came for the hope of finding land, gold first. God, of course, to look for Catholic converts and personal glory. Most of them didn't find gold. They didn't find the personal glory, and they were pretty ruthless about trying to convert Native Americans. Either you convert to Catholicism or we cut off every right leg at the knee. And they did. All right? And they did. It's ugly, but it happened. The Aztecs didn't get wiped out because the conquistadors had horses and body armor. They got wiped out because smallpox was brought in, and they didn't have immunities to European diseases. And so on. So yeah, you've got the Native Americans. And let me just, bring you up to the time of Iowa settlement. Iowa, in terms of Native American culture, represents two distinct and different Native American cultures. Think about it. What was most of Iowa? When it was part of the Louisiana, the eastern half of Iowa, what was it? It was hardwood deciduous forest. The series on Lewis and Clark that Ken Burns did years ago, he said that, the eastern part of the United States was so heavily forested, a squirrel could climb up a tree on the Atlantic coast and never have to get down until they got to the Mississippi River. That's how thick and most of eastern Iowa was heavily forested. Now, a little over half is prairie. So Iowa represents a transitional zone amongst Native Americans. Most of the Iowans, like the Sauk and the Fox, the largest numbers, they were sedentary. They built large villages. Right across from Davenport was Chief Blackhawk's home. He called it Saukinook. And it was large, thousands of people, where the Rock River meets the Mississippi. That was his home. And they were hunters and gatherers, but they also planted. What are the three sisters when we talk about Native American culture?
Corn, beans.
What are they?
Corn, beans, and squash.
Very good. Collectively, you guys all do pretty well here, all right? You're building that grade on that quiz up gradually. Corn, beans, and squash. And yeah, and you had distinct, jobs for men and women and so on. It varied from, there were tribal chiefs in some of the eastern tribes that were women. They were called Sachems, S-A-C-H-E-M-S. Women chiefs. Because men could be gone on a hunt for 5 months if game wasn't plentiful. So don't characterize all tribes again as having one sort of model that they were patterned after. So yeah, you've got in the sedentary tribes in the eastern part of Iowa. The western, we had elk and buffalo all over western Iowa. When you read about some of the first pioneers coming here. Last weekend, I spent 2 days at this wonderful park about 20 miles outside of Omaha. It's called Mahoney State Park in Nebraska. It's on the Platte River. And, it's a major flyway for all the major birds coming back. And, at one time, there were tens of thousands of buffalo there. And all kinds of other pronghorn antelope and elk all over Iowa. Yeah, and even some wolves in western Iowa. Long since gone. Well, they're nomads. And they were subdivisions of the Sioux Nation, a lot of them. The Oglala, okay? The Teton, and so on. And they did move around a lot, all right? So first, the indigenous people. Those are the first islands. Then the Spanish come. Manuel Lisa is here in the late early 1700s. Manuel Lisa is a Spaniard who didn't come for gold, God, and glory. He came because of fur. He was smart. And there's a fort in South Dakota called Fort Lisa. And he married a Native American woman, which was rare because the English and the Spanish considered Native Americans subordinate human beings. The French did intermarry. And they learned the culture of Native Americans. Not the English, not the Irish, not the Dutch, not the Germans. They were just to be moved out of the way. All right? Well, before, again, those Irish, English, and Germans, who's the second major group after the Spanish come here? It's the French. It's the French.
When did you say the Spanish arrived?
They're here in the late 1600s, early 1700s.
Okay.
Oh, no, the first Spanish in America are here in the late
No, I'm
1400s,
talking
early
about
1500s.
Iowa.
Yeah, well, we have evidence that they came up the Mississippi and they were exploring there. No permanent settlements, nothing like that.
No.
All right, but they were here. And Lisa, like I said, he was into fur, not with the other guys. He knew there was some money to be made there, and then no gold. All right, so they're just very few. And the French, they're a class of people. They're called the Couillard de Bois, which is a trapper and trader, and they're here. And you guys know the names of the first two that left solid evidence that they were here in 1673 in 2 canoes as they canoed down the Wisconsin River and said, whoa, that's a big river. That's the Mississippi. And they were looking across at Iowa. Marquette and Joliet. Father Marquette and Louis Joliet. The little town of Marquette, Iowa is named after the priest. Joliet, Illinois is named after, all right? They left evidence. They're here in June of 1673. The first people to lay claim to what is Iowa today are the French. And they would later on cede it to Spain. And then it would go back to France. And then I think you guys know what happens in the late 1700s in Europe. It's called the French Revolution. And Napoleon first was going to restore order to France after the French Revolution, but he didn't reveal his true motive. And that was to conquer Europe. And to do that, he needed money. So you know what happens during Jefferson's administration. We luck out. 15 million acres at 4 cents an acre. The Louisiana Purchase, and we become part of America. What we know as Iowa today. So it goes, obviously, a presence of Spanish. Well, first Native Americans, then Spanish, then French. And now all of a sudden, we're part of the Louisiana Purchase territory. Iowa itself, Missouri is admitted to the Union in 1820. And to basically balance it out over the question of slavery, Maine will come in as a free state. We're already debating over slavery in a serious way. Iowa, to become a state, you have to meet certain qualifications established by the U.S. Congress. You have to have a set population. You have to have a set form of government and a law and order courts, okay? And you have to have a certain number of white men before you qualify. First to become a territory, which Iowa will in 1838. And then just 8 years later, a state in 1846. Now let's backtrack a little bit. We talked about Black Hawk. He's one of few Native Americans that resists people flooding into Iowa. And I do want to, I'm watching the time, but I'm going to stop here for a minute and introduce you to just some basic stuff. And I don't know if the library probably has some of these. And if you don't, I want to make you feel bad. And I want you to get them. No. The grand dame of Iowa history, and she was a dear friend. She died of breast cancer about 10 years ago. Dr. Dorothy Schweter at Iowa State University. Dorothy's from South Dakota. She wrote 10 books. And this, to this day, is probably the best overall history of Iowa. It's called Iowa, the Middle Land, by Dr. Dorothy Schweter from Iowa State University. It has some weaknesses. It doesn't have a good chronology in the back. It should. But it has some tremendous strengths. It has a lot of social history. The roles of women, who we are ethnically. It's not just about, okay, generals and governors and white men. It has it has the first industries in Iowa. A good segment about Native Americans in it. I use this, you can see my copies all worn out, underlined with stuff stuck in it and everything else. I used this for about 10 years, 15 years. And it replaced the horrible history of Iowa written by a professor from UNI. And his name was Leland Sage, but it was so dry. He had a chapter on railroading, and I love the history of railroading. But he had a chapter, it literally put students to sleep. I mean, it was so bad. Talking about tax structure of railroads and all. These are college freshmen and sophomores. I mean, you want them to drop out of school real fast, make them read that stuff. This is pretty good. This one's out of print. It was put, the Iowa State Press, you can find copies on Amazon. It's called Patterns and Perspectives in Iowa History, again by Dr. Dorothy Schweter. But every chapter is written by a different Iowa historian. And there's one in here early on called The People Come. And it's all about who we are as Iowans, where we came from, both in Europe, here in the States, and how we ended up in Iowa. She shows population changes. There's an incredible letter. Who was Henry Peter Schulte, 1847? Who was he? You know the name? I referred to indirectly to who he is a little bit ago in this group. He's the man that founded Pella in 1847. Okay? And there's something in here. One of the people that came as part of that group of 700, his last name is Sipma, S-I-P-M-A. And he writes this glowing letter back to his relatives in Holland about having found paradise, a place called Iowa. I just gave you one of the pull factors. Those people that first came here would say, Germany's crowded, or you've got a war going on. Come to Iowa. Come to Iowa. All right? So it's stuff like that in here. Now, a new hire at Iowa State, and you can see I didn't even get a chance to mess up this book. Jeff Bremer is a professor at Iowa State right now. And this just came out about 3 years ago. And again, a new history of Iowa. Now, he was careful not to use the word improved, because he knew that he would get infinite flack from the people like Dorothy Schroeder. All right. So, no, Jeff's a good guy, and I don't know him well, but my Civil War Roundtable, he's going to be one of our speakers coming up soon, and I'll get to know him a lot better. And but again, well worth reading. I haven't read the whole thing, but I read. And then another one that I just grabbed, and I've got probably 75 books on Iowa history, but I did grab this one because a friend of mine wrote it. He served with me on the State Historical Society board. And how many of you have Irish ancestry? Okay. All right. That's not much. This is what she showed me. I think she's embarrassed by her one Irish relative. No, I don't know. All right. It's Irish Iowa by Tim Walsh. Tim was the director of the Hoover Museum for years down in West Branch. And he still writes for the Iowa History Journal. And obviously 100% Irish. And this just came out a few years ago too. It's an easy read. You can sit down and read it in a couple of hours at most. Okay? So those are 4 that I grabbed for, after I leave here. And I don't know if you have any of them or not in the library.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Okay. No, that's fine. But whenever I do this, whether it's the baseball history, Civil War history, I bring books. And I've done, of my nearly 250 programs, probably 175 are in libraries. And so I try and help out librarians in the local community, not putting you on the spot. All right. So anyway, we're up to the 1830s, 40s. Native Americans are being removed, and the Black Hawk War is one of the last sort of efforts of resistance, and it's not really a war. That's a misnomer. It's a group of Sauk and Faw being chased by military troops along the Iowa-Illinois border, and eventually into the Mississippi River, where they're shot at and killed. And Black Hawk surrenders. And on the other side of the river were Sioux that don't like the Sauk and the Fox, and they were also helping eliminate Black Hawk and his people. And so pretty much, by the last lands ceded in Iowa by any Native American group, with the exception of the Meskwaki, are up in northwest Iowa in the 1850s by the Sioux. And I think most of you have heard of the Spirit Lake Massacre, okay? So there's still Native Americans up there in the 1850s. Now, after the Black Hawk War ends in 1833, Iowa is open for settlement. And settlement is going to happen very quickly. By the early to mid-1850s, all of Iowa is settled. So about a 20-year period, okay? The pattern of settlement in Iowa, and this makes sense, is southeast to northwest along the river valleys. Almost every first in Iowa history is in a Mississippi River town. The oldest city, Dubuque. The first bridge, Davenport. Okay? You can go on and on. A number of the firsts are there. Now, there's a few exceptions in some of the interior towns not far from the Mississippi River, but most are over there. And there's another reason why the pattern of settlement takes place the way it did. What was some of the mistaken sort of ideas people had about the best land for growing crops? We didn't know much about agronomy when we came here. The first state fair in 1854 in Fairfield, it was organized by city people, hobby farmers who were experimenting with ideas that came from Europe and basically discarding the old ways of doing farming. One of the old beliefs was the best farming is where the trees grew the tallest. Well, you guys know this, that oak trees, elm trees are not good for corn and soybeans. And they practice something called slash and burn agriculture. You keep growing corn on the same piece of land until it's a stunted certain growth, and then you burn it off and move on. That makes no sense at all. Where was the best land in Iowa? Northwest Iowa. What did an acre of land sell for about 2 years ago up in Sioux County? $30,000. All right, an acre of land. I think it's now down to some kind of realistic number. But the best land was the prairie grass land, where the glaciers had come 3 times and left that incredible, rich topsoil. All right? So, the pattern of settlement, how fast was Iowa settled? Wapello County, county seat, Ottumwa. What were squatters? You know the term at all? You know the term from early Iowa history?
The squatters are people that settle on land without owning it.
Again, she's right on track. Got to add a little bit more. She said settled on land before they could own it. They were here illegally, but they were laying claim until the land office opened. And then they would leave somebody on that piece of land with a big gun and send somebody else to claim the land. Wapello County was settled in 24 hours. There were so many squatters there. And yeah, violence happened because of that. Because no one was there legally. The first land offices aren't open until 1838. So you've got a period of 4 or 5 years where a lot of people were claim jumping and everything else. All right? All right, now let's go back to Europe and get to these basic groups. We started out asking about Irish English and so on. What's going on in Europe as a push factor that might start to bring in the mid-1800s some of these groups? We already know about the French Revolution, opening up the land. It's cheap. Before we get there, when did Ohio become a state? 1803. By the time Iowa was opened up, Ohio's crowded. They're still practicing eldest son stuff in Ohio. Most of the people that come to Iowa will come from neighboring states. This idea that people came in Conestoga wagons or the American wagon, no way. Those were long-haul travelers heading further west. Conestoga's in Pennsylvania where those are built. There's one down at the historical building you can look at. Most of the people that came here to Iowa came from a neighboring state, and they walked here where they had a small wagon with the basic things they needed to start their family. They didn't come that far. When do Illinois and Indiana become states? Right after the War of 1812 ends in 1815. Those states will get settled fairly quickly. So, Iowa. How expensive was Iowa land as it's being opened up?
My great-grandfather, 1880, $5 an acre for 80 acres.
Cheaper? The 80 acres is right. Who sets the rules on the cost of land and how many acres you can own? Congress. When this country was first settled, you had to buy a minimum 320 acres at $2 an acre. Most Europeans that came here couldn't afford that. So the rich got most of the land. The large plantations, the large land tracts, all went to the rich. But with each generation, the cost of an acre went down. And the amount of land, the minimum you could own, went down. And you're right, by the time of Iowa, it was 80 acres, but it was cheaper than that, $1.25. $100 buys you a farm. What kind of a pull factor do you need to come here? $100 buys you a farm. And so, what's going on in Europe? Let's look at some other events going on in there.
30 Years' War.
Well, no, that's earlier, but I want to, ones that directly affect Iowa. I tell my students that one of the most important years in Iowa history and U.S. history is 1848. Why?
Potato famine.
That's one. She said the potato famine. Potato famine starts in 1845. It was a blight on the potato, And there should be a lesson, and we haven't learned it very well here in America. Don't ever allow a state or a country depend on one or two crops. The potato is not indigenous to Ireland. It was brought over by Columbus and the early explorers to Ireland.
From Peru.
It's called the Columbian Exchange, you're right, Peru. There were no potatoes in Ireland. And then it wipes out Ireland because they became too dependent on it. The blight is first noticed in 45 and they said, oh, it'll go away. And then it's there in 46 and it's bigger. And it keeps spreading. The peak years of the potato famine are 48 and 49. 3 million Irish die. Over 2 million leave. A lot of them coming to Iowa. We'll talk about that. And the others stayed and lived in poverty. And the British loved it because they had warehouses full of food. And they said, this is the final solution to the Irish problem. Let them starve to death. Oh yeah. And a lot of the Irish that came here, by the time they came here after a 12-week voyage across the ocean, they're called coffin ships. They wouldn't allow anyone to come ashore until they carried all the bodies off, and then a certain period of time till they knew the disease wasn't spreading, and then the Irish could come. Welcome to America. All right? 1846, Iowa becomes a state. Here's the potato famine. What else is going on in that year that serves as push-pull factors both for Iowa and America? A couple of other really important events. The gold rush in California. The gold rush in California. The American River. John Sutter's walking along the river and something shiny catches his eye. And he holds it up and lo and behold, it's gold. And all of a sudden everyone in America thinks they can be rich in days. So you've got massive people coming across Iowa. Their last point of contact with civilization's Council Bluffs and Omaha. And then the dangerous Oregon Trail, Santa Fe Trail, Chisholm Trail, as they try and find their way to California or other places. What percent became rich that came across heading for California? Less than 2%. Again, most of the money went to big mining companies, worked by Chinese immigrants and others. So where did a lot of people come back to? Their last contact with civilization and free land or cheap land, Iowa. They went to California. They lost family members. They came back to Iowa and settled. What else ended in 1848 that's a push-pull factor when Iowa becomes a state? One other important event, really important. The Mexican War. Started in 46. It ends February of 48. It's called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And a lot of the young soldiers that fought in that war came from the South, but some came from Iowa. And they couldn't always pay them in script, which is a form of currency, so they paid them how? Land. In land. Anyone know who Loras College is named after? Anyone? Father Matthias Loras, Catholic priest. When is he in Northeast Iowa? The 1830s, before we become a territory. He came from Ireland and he loves Northeast Iowa. So when the potato famine hit, people were encouraging Irish to come to New Orleans because there's supposedly great land around Fort Smith, Arkansas. Well, Father Loras knew better. He goes down to New Orleans and welcomes these Irish families and says, it is hot and humid and bug infested in Arkansas. Let me take you to the new paradise, Northeast Iowa. You go up to Alamogordo County, it's about 100% Irish. You go down further to Dubuque, and it's German. All right? But there's Irish all over that 6-county area in Northeast Iowa. He's one of the reasons. He's one pull factor, push factors. So, again, something else that's going on. A couple of other events. A little bit later, obviously, when does the railroad reach the Mississippi River? This is important too. About what year? Coming from the east, in the 1850s, the mid-1850s. The first bridge is built across the Mississippi in 1856 and 7. But what happens just a couple of years later when there are tracks that are laid to Iowa City before the war starts in 1861, the Civil War. And then, of course, President Lincoln said, all you engineers, all you workers on the railroad, stop. We need you for the war effort. Grenville Dodge was a railroad builder who's going to work for the Union Army and become rich doing it. All right? The Dodge House is still in Council Bluffs. 4 presidents have visited it. Okay? Obviously, the railroad building in Iowa had gotten how far at the time of the Civil War? To Boone, the Des Moines River. Boone still celebrates Pufferbilly days. What is a Pufferbilly?
Steam locomotive.
A steam locomotive, exactly right. A mining camp or a railroad camp. Belson grew up on the east side of the Des Moines River. The minute the Civil War is over, the race was on to Council Bluffs. Why was the race on? Because the federal government provided alternating sides of the track, 6,000 acres of free land to the people that laid that track. It's government giving money to the rich. Now, something else was passed during the Civil War, the Homestead Act of 1862. That was a chance for ordinary Americans to get 160 acres if they agreed to work the land for 5 years. Now, what did the railroads do? Think about it, most of the towns in eastern Iowa are built around the city square in concentric circles. Most of the towns in western Iowa are built parallel to the railroad tracks and the depot. By the time the end of the century, the 1900 comes around, no one in Iowa lives further than 8 miles from a railroad track. A lot of them were feeder lines for agriculture supplies and things like that. That's how extensive the railroad networks were. And that just guaranteed the quick settlement of everything here and then on further west. Now we've talked a little about, we need to talk again about something else that was going on in Europe in 1848. I haven't mentioned yet. Revolution. Revolution. What countries were primarily affected by revolution? France, Germany, Spain. You want a push factor to leave Europe? Try revolution. That'll kick a whole bunch of Germans out, all right? Who come to Iowa. Who come to Iowa. Not very many French. The Icarians are an exception. Etienne Cabet brought a large group to southwest Iowa. And they were totally communal. French communists. Well, think about this. The first Atlantic colonies were Christian communists. The word communal, that's where it comes, nothing to do with Marx and Lenin. To this day in the Amanas, when you die, how are you buried? Do you have a great big monument to yourself and your family? You're buried as equal to everyone else that dies in the Amanas in order of dying, and all the markers are the same. You do have a new Amana and an old Amana, but they still have a lot of the practices of before the Great Depression when they went capitalist, all right? So we have some rich sort of experiments of different ways of structuring society as all these different European groups find their way here. Now let's just jump forward because we're at an hour mark. I'll finish up here in the next 10 minutes at most. Give you a chance to ask some questions. What happens in 1870 in Europe that serves as another push factor that brings a whole new group over here? Who is old blood and iron in European history? Old blood and iron. That's his nickname.
Bismarck.
Thank you. Otto von Bismarck, Prussia. What was it like living in Prussia if you were a young man?
They were unifying Germany at that time.
Germany's being unified for the first time in its history. Using blood and iron. A lot of people leave. A lot of people leave. What other country is being unified for the first time in exactly the same year? New group of islands.
Italy?
No?
Italy?
Italy. Italy. Never been unified before that. City-states, the Vatican. It's being unified. Victor Emmanuel II, Giuseppe Garibaldi, okay? Count Cavour, three fathers of New Italy. Northern Italians hated Southern Italians. Who are a lot of Iowans that leave from Southern Italy where they were discriminated against? They come from places like Calabria, all right? Where is the cultural center of Italians in Iowa? South side of Des Moines, St. Anthony's Parish. All right? To this day, you want good Italian food? That's where you go. Now, there's good Italian food all over Des Moines now, because the second generation, third generation, they all know each other. They're all cousins, all right? But, so we've got Irish, English, and I'm just sort of giving you a feel for the dominant groups, that come here to Iowa. Now, obviously, the Dutch left because they were discriminated against. First, they didn't, first of all, they didn't come directly here. Some of them went to Europe before they came here, all right? The Scandinavians, what percent of Norway is good, arable topsoil capable of producing any kind of crops? What percentage?
10 or 20.
Oh, you're too high. 4%. Yeah. Try and grow corn on a boulder or on the side of a fjord. It doesn't work. So obviously, these other groups come in smaller numbers. The Czechs, because of, again, political turmoil. Cedar Rapids, the Czech Museum. I think, where's the Dane Center of Cultural? Elkhorn, Kimballton. The women's basketball coach at Iowa. That's her ancestors. All right, Jen, okay. So we do still have, cultural centers for a lot of the ethnic groups that come here. And of course, recently, Bob Ray, to his dying day, he said the two Protestant things he accomplished as governor was the bottle bill and bringing the Thai, Dam, and Vietnamese refugees to Iowa. We just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon 2 days ago. All right? That was Bob Ray's proudest achievement, bringing those people to Iowa. And, and now we have Serbians and Bosnians, and we have, discriminated Jews from a lot of Eastern European countries and so on. There's a Thai Dam village in Des Moines, okay? Now, the last thing I'm going to do, I have a personal reason, okay, for teaching this course. I ask you, does anyone have any idea what my last name's ethnicity is? Liepa.
It sounds Eastern European.
Is it what?
It sounds Eastern European.
You're close again. Her quarter points are adding up real fast. I mean, never quite totally right, but on the right track. All right?
Romanian.
Go north. All right, let me tell you something.
Polish.
I'm an immigrant. Okay? Okay? I'm not trying to impress you. English is my third language.
Polish?
No, I'm Latvian.
Latvian.
My parents were World War II refugees. My father was an officer that fought against the Russians. I was born in a displaced persons camp in Germany after the Allies took over. Latvian was my first language as a little fart, then German, and then English. I still speak all three fairly fluently. Not the technical side of language, but the personal sort of side, okay? I have dual citizenship, and I'm proud of it. I've been back to Latvia since it joined NATO and broke away from the Soviet Union. And my mother, who died about 20 years ago, my mother came over on the USS Muir, which was a World War II ship, with my two older brothers and I and my younger brother, okay? She had never flown in an airplane, but when she was in her 70s, one of my brothers and I paid for her to fly back for the first time to visit her farm in Latvia. And she could have taken that farm right away from the couple that lived there. They were a lovely young Russian couple. I speak a little bit of Russian. And they had worked hard to set up a special lunch for us and tea. She showed us around the farm and so on, where the sauna was and where the orchard was and everything. And then my mom, like some biblical figure, decided on the spot to give the land to that young couple. They'd have to do the paperwork, but she gave them the farm. She said that it was Iowa, in America that rescued my family. And she said, I'll always be a Latvian, okay? But the relatives that stayed there, a lot of them went to Siberia, to the Gulag, sent there by the Russians, okay? A lot were killed. Quite a few still lived there, but they ended up living in poverty. We were the lucky ones to escape. My father didn't show us till we were older, but he had a number of bullet holes in him, all right? And that, so I've got my own little personal odyssey and reasons for teaching this. And I'm going to stop here, but I will answer some questions. I'm not in a hurry, okay? And again, I do encourage you to read Mr. Pratt's comments at the Naturalization Center. Oh, one last little story about myself. I became a naturalized citizen when I was finishing my master's work at Iowa State. And you have to go through the naturalization ceremony. And I think some of you have seen probably in the news that the Iowa legislature finally decided that for any high school graduate, you've got to pass a naturalization test. If I gave that to all your high school kids here, 90% would flunk it right now. And they wouldn't be able to be citizens, all right? Well, anyway, I went down there to take the test. And they give you a little booklet with basic information about American history of government. And I looked at it pretty quick, and I said, I think I'm ready. She said, well, you've only had the book 5 minutes. And I said, well, go ahead and throw some questions at me. All right, who's the father of our country? Okay, can you name the 3 branches of government? Okay, I named those. And then one of the ladies, they're from the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution. They help out with this. Lovely ladies. And one of them says, what do you do up at Iowa State? I said, well, I teach college students U.S. history and government. And then they looked at each other and said, is there any rule we need to go on to this? You know, and they said, nah, you're a citizen. They did. And so I laughed for about 10 minutes. But it was a serious thing because applying for jobs, they all ask, are you a U.S. citizen? The forms. And I wasn't. And for a number of years as a young adult, I was a Latvian by birthright, a German by birthplace. I'd never become an American citizen. I was a man without a country. And I didn't realize that if I'm going to get a job anywhere, I've got to go through this process. And I did. All right? So, anyway, all right, questions. There are a lot of other things I could discuss, a lot more information, but I've tried to touch at least on some of the highlights, a little bit chronologically and so on, and some of the things that we all need to sort of think about when we talk about our own ancestry, how we got here. And I want you guys, in addition to reading Judge Pratt's comments, think about your own family, why they left, where they left, how they ended up in Iowa. You gave us one of the reasons, cheap land, and that's a reason for a lot of people. But there were other reasons as well. Religious reasons, you know, a lot of reasons. Personal family reasons, kicked out of the family reasons, you were the only pariah in the family, who knows? Every family has black sheep, we know that. So, anyone, questions, comments? Anything you want to bring up?
Was there,
Oh, this young lady had a hand up, and then I'll get yours.
I'm curious if you know, because my kids have been learning Alden history,
Okay.
and
Who was Alden founded by?
Henry Alden.
Very good. What year?
1854.
Mid-1850s.
Yeah.
All right. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So in doing, we know that when the quarry was first founded, before they had machines, they brought in Greek workers.
Okay.
But then after it became automated, that population went away. And we're trying to figure out where they went and why, because there's really nothing to speak about them besides they were here.
I can tell you where most of them went. As agriculture became more automated, more energy intensive, a lot of them went to the big cities. Because, you know, that's where they had enclaves of, name an ethnic group. And in Chicago, there are entire neighborhoods were great with the restaurants. A lot of them really had no choice because there weren't jobs anymore. Think even of a lot of the young Italians that came here, a term I didn't use, it's called birds of passage. And they came here to work as single young men and would live in a boarding house. And what were the 2 big industries that they worked in here in Iowa first? They worked in the coal mines from Boone on to southeast Iowa, and they worked on the railroads. They worked on the railroads. And every year they would work seasonally here and then go back to Italy. And every year it went harder to go back to Italy because they saw opportunity here. And then the younger brother would come. And then another family member would come. And pretty soon they'd pay for mom and dad to come. And then they didn't go back to Italy. They were hated by Americans and discriminated against. Because, and think of a lot of seasonal workers, Hispanics. They'd come to work in the vegetable fields and gardens by Muscatine Mounds. I worked highway construction on Interstate 35. My crew was almost entirely Hispanic. Our crew leader was Arnie. He was from outside of Mexico City. I did this as a college student for 4 summers. Great pay, all right? Hard work, 12-hour days. I asked Arnie, he ran a crew of about 15 of us. And there were a couple of other college students, and the other guys were all from Mexico. And I learned a lot of Mexican swear words, but beyond that, all right. Well, beyond that, I told Arnie, I said, Arnie, when you're not here in Iowa working 60, 70 hours a week, what do you do in Mexico? And he said, John, every time I go back, I invest in rental properties and I sit by my pool and listen to opera. And I said, yes! I said, but a lot of people would hate him for that. Would hate him. He built Interstate 35. He was one of many people that built it. And we still have that, where we have seasonal workers. And they're resented because they're not full Americans, okay? Whatever that means. I'm not going to try and define it. And that answers partly your question. If you have small ethnic groups in a state like Iowa, where they don't find a lot of people like them, and the jobs are no longer there, then you're going to go to where there are other Greek-speaking people. And a lot of them just go to the big cities. And think the only small towns in Iowa that are growing, Storm Lake, Denison, is because they have meatpacking plants or poultry plants, and Hispanic workers are there boosting the population. There are fewer than 12 counties in Iowa growing. Most are dying, including this one, all right? You just don't have the jobs, decent jobs. They're not here. And I've been to Tabor, Iowa, Cambridge, Iowa. I've done programs all over. Lakota, Iowa, Tatanka, Iowa. I did one in Corwith, not far from here. Corwith is 270 people. And a little political comment. Write to your congressional delegates about stop cutting funding for libraries, all right? They're slashing the budgets for museums, libraries. They cut out History Day for middle school with a 1-day notice. They cut out History Day at the historical building. They cut out funding for the National Endowment for the Humanities, which sponsors Humanities Iowa. That's all happened in the last month. They've cut it out. I don't want to get partisan, but there was no rhyme and reason to those cuts, and there was a reason. The heartbeat of this community is the library, and maybe 1 or 2. You've got the grain, facilities here. You've got the library. Corwith, Iowa has virtually nothing. It's down to 250 people. And the librarian, she's wonderful. She's a retired minister. She's about 4'10", but her uncle played professional baseball, so she called me to do the program. And I pull into town, and there's like 20 people with grills in the front lawn of the library grilling hot dogs and hamburgers, and they packed a room smaller than this, And I said, it really speaks volumes about the importance of the library. And I know I'm on my little political, thing here, but there was no rhyme and reason to cut library budgets and cutting out, History Day for high school and middle school kids that are trying to do exactly what I've been doing here for the last hour and 15 minutes. Let you know a little bit more about your state. Yeah.
Yeah. Our town of Iowa Falls to the east here
Yeah.
was originally settled in the very early 1850s by members of the Friends Church. Now, most of the Friends in Hardin County are situated in the southern Hardin County around New Providence.
Okay.
The Friends had pretty much vanished from Iowa Falls, their church and everything, by the 1930s. Do you know why that is?
I don't know that.
You don't know? You don't know something?
No. Hey, the first sign of an intelligent person is they can tell you, I don't know that, but I'll look into it, all right? I'm doing a program here next week, my baseball program, and you guys all know where this is, Union, Iowa, all right? It's not far from here. But the librarian there, I was invited there last fall, I and Marcy Dalsby. Has Marcy done any programs here? She does programs all over small town Iowa on everything from Iowa cooking to, just interesting programs. And 2 of us were invited to meet with 2 national representatives of the National Endowment for the Humanities at the library in Union, Iowa. And the state director was there, the state advisor was there. We were honored to be invited because there's about 30 or 40 of us on the Speaker's Bureau. But we reached out, the 2 of us, to more small towns than any other of the speakers. And we were there to apply for a 2-year multi-million-dollar grant to benefit small towns with programs like this. It was gutted a month and a half ago. Gutted completely. All right? No funding. They just cut it. No rhyme or reason given. All right? They just cut it. NEH funds. You can look it up. All right? National Endowment for the Humanities, which makes programs like this possible. I'm going to Union to do my program. They found some, private funding to help out with these programs. There's a group out of Coralville that has quite a bit of money called History Inc. And they're helping out Humanities Iowa. And so we're okay through the spring speaking. But after that, anyone's guess if you're going to be able to have programs like this anymore. I would do these for just to cover my expenses. That's why I said what I said earlier. But it's just something that should not be cut out. I mean, and again, Americans generally have a lousy background to their own history, their country's history. And Iowa's no exception. And I know I'm passionate about it, but I've seen it happening the last 15 years. So, anyone else? Comments, questions? Go ahead.
We're talking about push-pull.
Yeah.
What was the push-pull around 1815?
1815? Well, part of it was the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And a realignment in countries. And I think part of it was, there were different religious groups that were they subdivided what had been part of the French, literally world empire. And, that's part of it. But I think part of it too is the Louisiana Purchase.
Well, there is another one that you haven't mentioned.
Go ahead.
Mount Toba erupted. Mount Toba in Indonesia.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Which basically was the year without a summer.
Yeah.
And so.
I'm aware of it, but yeah, I didn't think of it. Yeah.
Basically famines in the East Coast.
Yeah.
And so there was kind of a push.
So anyway, that's my program. You've been patient. Anyone else? Question I might try to answer? Anyone? Just go
I'd like to
ahead.
see you afterwards, if that's okay.
I'm not going anywhere. The drive back to Des Moines on a beautiful day is fine.
The orphan trains were something that came into Iowa, and Davenport was a main drop-off for the orphan trains.
Yeah, I know about them, not a lot, but aware of them. Yeah. These were they did the same thing with a lot of Native American young boys, especially. They tried to thoroughly Americanize them, and they separated them from their family. And they cut off their hair. They forbid the teaching of their native languages and so on. And it's a horrible history.
And that's
Canada
why-
was involved. We were involved.
That's why the Meskwaki is so
Yeah.
unique, is because they maintained their own schools.
They're not a reservation. They govern themselves.
Yeah.
They're lucky in that respect. Yeah. I kind of jokingly refer to Meskwaki bingo as Native American revenge. Well, think about it. We all go down there and spend our hard-earned money, hoping to hit the jackpot, and we're helping them a little bit. That's fine with me.
Some a little more than others.
Oh, yeah. Are you one of those?
Yeah.
All right. He's got to give to the library when he's the jackpot. Anyone else? All right, thank you for being patient. Thank you for being here.